So the stuff we had remaining this afternoon was on the schedule was I was going to do a session on centering prayer. So everyone's so bored with by now, and I think I had something about practical Christian mysticism. I think it said.
Yes.
Is that what it said?
It looks great.
Oh, what a pity. Never mind. Now let me see. So there's a way of presenting all that stuff, which is. I've drawn my understanding of that bunch of stuff from the teaching of Cynthia Bourgeot,
Tell them to shut up.
particularly.
All close the door.
Stop singing praises to your Lord.
From Cynthia Bourgeot particularly, and in a more general way from the sort of Benedictine end of the Christian tradition, specifically through the work of Father Thomas Keating and some of the other Trappist fathers in the US. Cynthia is really my main line into the tradition, and I appreciate her approach to it because she takes a, this is a loose use of the term, but she takes a phenomenological approach to spiritual practice. So which is to say, she talks about it in terms of how it seems when you experience it, rather than talking about it in terms of a traditional Christian doctrinal stance. Father Thomas Keating takes more of a traditional Christian doctrinal stance, which is a beautiful thing because it's often hard to mandate spiritual practice from a traditional Catholic position. So it's a great gift that he's given. But now that's all good, and that's been my road into it. And I've been teaching this stuff for a few years, and then this is how I teach it, which is great. The thing is that it's also, you've got to do a certain amount of twisting and wiggling and stuff to get to the point where you can teach it from a traditional Christian stance in some ways, because it's not the easiest thing to anchor in canonical scripture, for starters. It's not the easiest thing to turn Catholic dogma to meet. So there's a certain amount of wiggling that has to get done in order to make that work. On the other side, we're Gnostics, and we've got this lovely corpus of Gnostic scripture that's been around for the last 70 years now, I suppose. Sorry, wait, no, yes, 70-ish years, 75 years or something, that we've had a really rich access to. And my take on a lot of Gnostic scripture is it's like the graduate class in Christianity, really. That once you've sort of got the basics and you're in a community, everything's good, and you start practicing, then a range of hilarious phenomena result, and, well, here's some books that might guide you into what that's about. So that Gnostic scripture is remarkably easy to turn to the task of teaching spiritual practice over against canonical scripture, which is sometimes a bit difficult. So it makes some kind of sense to me, I think, to start from a Gnostic stance to teach some of this stuff that is traditionally considered Christian mysticism. I haven't prepared this terribly well, so we'll just see how we go.
It's like you've had other things on your brain.
It's almost like I've had other things on my brain. Well, this version of what I was going to do this afternoon's taken 3 different forms in the last 2 weeks, so I'm kind of haven't been entirely certain quite what to do, quite what to focus on, and quite how to focus on it. So let me just paint you a picture of the kind of the pieces of the system first, to kind of give you a sense of what the practices are. And some of those I'm going to give very short shrift, because I think you're all intelligent people, and if I just sort of say, do this, this, and this, and you take some notes, you'll be fine. And a couple of the pieces I think need a bit more dwelling on, because it takes a bit more talking. That's the first thing, is to talk about the practices that to me kind of form part of the system. And there's a bunch of other stuff that you can sweep up in that, and there's alternatives to all these things, and it's not a consistent, coherent thing, and everyone's got a different view. And when I do that, I'll ask if anybody else has anything else they want to throw onto the map, and we'll do that. The second thing is, and I'm kind of hesitant to do this because it might be a complete furphy, or it might be the kind of thing that works for some people and really doesn't work for others very well at all, but I'm going to give it a go. So I'm going to give you a model of the nature of the mind from a Gnostic point of view and a phenomenological stance. That could be completely bogus, and in fact it may only work for me. but what the heck, we'll take some risks, and if it's awful, we won't put it on YouTube. How's that? And then we'll do some practice. Does that all sound alright? Okay, so let's make it begin. Can I just check before I get started, is there anyone in the room who's never practiced centering prayer ever? Okay, a little. And is there anyone who's never heard anything about centering prayer ever? You might have read a bit about it, but not actually done it. So everybody's read a bit about it. Basic idea of what it. Okay, just check. Okay, that's cool. All right. All right. So the heart of Christian monastic mysticism, you might say, is, I would say, in the West, we say it was contemplation. I have to do a little wiggly bit here, because if Vivian presented a thing, and I was going to speak about it then, Vivian presented that self-care session earlier in the week. There's two words that get used in opposite ways in Buddhism and Christianity. So if you're reading across traditions, you'll bump into this little speed bump. It's awkward because really those Buddhist terms have only been translated into English in the last 100 years, and you really would have thought we could have got this one right. But the two words are contemplation and meditation. Now, in a non-technical way, those two words can be used to mean exactly the same thing. In traditional Christian practice jargon, contemplation only refers to the training of the content-free empty awareness of God, right? Meditation refers to the rumination on a topic. So you might meditate on a text. In some ways, I prefer to sort of say contemplation and rumination and leave meditation out of the picture, right? But if you're kind of reading one of the Gospels and you're kind of chewing it over for a while, in Christian tradition, that's called meditation. In Buddhism, meditation's only used to refer to the training of attention and awareness and the development of insight without focusing on the cognitive content of anything. And contemplation's really used in the English Buddhist text to mean cognitive engagement with rumination on a text or an object or a mandala or something. You chew on it, right? So they're pretty much used in exactly contrary ways. I've been saying this for years, and
I argue with you every time.
Well, do you think that's wrong?
You find it used both ways in Buddhism as well. I think it's more important just to attune to what the when you're reading, what are they describing? Yeah, you just listen to that.
Because some Buddhist authors are probably trying to, it depends a little bit.
Yeah.
I've bumped into too many texts that use it the other way around. No, that's not what meditation. Oh, right. Oh, I see, right. I hit the bump first, reading about meditation in Christian books and kind of going, these Christians don't have any idea what meditation is at all. And I gradually realised they were using another word for it. So that's just a little bump in the road. So, one part of the system, at the core of it, is, let's just say, contemplation, for the sake of it. Now, the one part of the system is broadly in the world of, so there's that, let's say, in the middle. And let's say that there's another part of it which is about different approaches to text. And one of the key approaches is chant. And we approach that with the Psalms, and that's got a particular use to it. And the other thing that's part of that, I bet that's my phone.
No, that's wrong.
Sorry.
It's not.
Hi, Noel, how are you?
Monastic approach to scripture is not to just simply read scripture and take it on face value as fact. It's you mine it, you dig scripture. So the two things to do that, chant in particular is used to bring the whole of the, you could say the subtle body, the body of breath, to bear on the text, and that's to kind of get the breath body or the subtle body or the body of the voice vibrating in tune to whatever it is in the text. And the Psalms are a great tool for that because the tradition says the Psalms express every emotion of which the human being is capable. And so you're kind of bringing all those emotions into being by chanting the Psalms. And there's old traditions of that. Father Greg talked about this the other night about the monks in the desert. In the Coptic monasteries, the Opea, they chant pretty much the whole of the Book of Psalms, I think, every day. They don't do a lot else. They don't farm. Benedictines farm, so they chant a lot less, but still. That's one of those things I'm going to give very short shrift, because it's really not that hard to do. You take the Book of Psalms, you pick a psalm. I suggest 1 is a good place to start. And then when you're finished with that, go for 2. You pick the psalm, you chain your attention to the psalm, and you try and bring as much of yourself as you possibly can to chanting the psalm. And if you don't know any ways to chant, monotone's just fine. Open my lips, O Lord, and my mouth shall proclaim your praise. O God, make speed to save me. O Lord, make haste to help me. If you're not musical, that's just fine. Because if you get more complicated than that, you're going to be fretting about what you're doing with the music and not focusing on the psalm. And your focus is to focus on the psalm. And if you find your attention wandering, redouble your efforts to bring all of you to bear on the psalm. So feel what the words mean. If the word says praise, see if you can bring praise into what you're singing. If the word says rage or revenge, see if you can bring all of the anger you can summon up to being on the phrase. Continue. If you want to, my second psalm tone that I really like goes up, I think, who's musical? Okay, I think a third. You can tell me if it's a third or a fifth, I'm not sure. Open my lips, O Lord.
It's a second.
It's a second. And my mouth shall proclaim your praise. So you go up at the last syllable on the first line. Psalms usually come in paired lines, although they often come in 3s and 4s just to break the rule. So you just muddle along, and it'll be fine. That's chanting the Psalms. There's a lot more you could say about it, but most of it's not worth saying unless you've gone and done some. So I commend to you chanting the Psalms. That's part of it. Okay, we've completed practice workshop 1. Tick. You can tick off your passport. Lexio, which I probably will talk a little further about, is a particular way of prayerfully entering into scriptural text and allowing the scriptural text to expand into a space of meaning which the human mind can begin to occupy, and ultimately the human heart can begin to occupy, such that you bring that space of meaning from text into everyday life. It kind of rocks, I've got to tell you, and it's the best antidote to scriptural literalism I've ever met. So I'll talk a bit more about that. I put those in the, never mind. I'm just making this diagram up as we go along. So the second piece that interconnects, contemplation interconnects with that, because the way you train the mind to behave during contemplation is what you bring to bear on the text in both Lexio and chanting the Psalms. And as important, I think, the way in which the heart becomes tuned, because what happens in contemplation isn't just the training of the mind, it's also the tuning of the heart. So the heart becomes attentive. I don't mean the physical organ becomes attentive, but there's a deeper, broader sense of who you are that begins to come to life in contemplation. And that is classically called the heart. That sense of a broader, deeper sense of self. And that's what you're bringing to bear when you chant. And that's what you bring to bear on Lexio. So contemplation's exquisitely interconnected with the textual practice of the tradition. It's also interconnected with the ritual practice of the tradition. And there's 2 classic parts to that. One's the divine office, and it's also called the office of the hours. And that's because it happens every few hours. There's no particular mystery. So that's just a cycle, it's just a cycle of prayer that happens through the day. In a monastic setting, the whole monastery grinds to a screaming halt in a Benedictine monastery. There's a beautiful movie called Integrate Silence, where a filmmaker stays at a Carthusian monastery for a whole year. So he's filming the seasons as they pass across the landscape and the lives of the monks as they move through it. And
it's a pretty awesome movie.
It's a pretty awesome movie. Set aside a couple hours.
The backstory is...
The backstory is great, but let's not digress. Quiz Ralph about the backstory of the day. But what you see really, really visibly is that at each of the hours, and the hours happen every roughly 3 hours through the course of the day, the bell rings, whatever you're doing. You could be digging in the garden, you could be, walking along a corridor. You see a guy, he's pushing and trolling along the corridor full of towels, and the bell rings and he goes, right. He goes over and does that. So if you're mid-hoeing, you stop, you go knit on. So whatever you're doing, that's less important than the work, which is this. Everything else is there to sustain the work, which is the office of the hours. And you either go to chapel, or you stop where you are, and you pray whatever the correct set of prayers is for that office of the day. Terrific, awesome. And if you have monastic fantasies, that's one of the elements of the classic monastic fantasy. Wouldn't it be great to live in an environment where a whole day was taken up with prayer? Absolutely, go do it. I strongly encourage you to go and live in a monastery. Terrific. However, none of you are, so it's interesting to talk about. This stuff's all adaptable to daily life because you can do these things. Both of those things can form part of a personal office of the hours. But the essence of the office is to look at the two hinge points of the day, which is dawn and dusk. And classically, in Hebrew tradition, the liturgical day starts at dusk. As the sun sets, that's the beginning of the next day. So Vespers is the office of the evening, and opinions vary, but let's say Lord's is the office of the morning. It's got various names. But evening prayer and morning prayer is the two hinge points of the day. So to think about building into your day something that isn't just meditation, but perhaps also has some verbal prayer. You might chant one psalm, perhaps, first thing in the morning when you first wake up. Or you might sit down and read a paragraph. Keep a marker in a Bible and read a paragraph of the next book of the Gospels and do some lectio with it. But you pick one point for a little bit of prayer, something ritual, some engagement with text at the beginning and the end of the day. The other 2 points of the day that it's interesting to think about placing some moment of pause into is bedtime, Compline, is the office that's normally done at bedtime, and that's great for a reflection on the day. What did I get up to? How did I miss the mark? What could I do better next time? To really reflect on what happened in your day. And there are more and less complicated practices to do at that time of the day, but you can rewind back through your entire day, hour by hour, mentally at that time and reflect on every single moment. Or you can simply sit there and go, how did I do today? And offer up whatever it is you want to confess that you think you might not have done so well at, that maybe you'd like to do better at tomorrow, and surrender that in prayer. Freeform. The middle of the day is an interesting time for recollection, because we all get caught up, with deference to those who are in shift work. David, you're probably on non-standard working hours, I suspect.
No, I'm standing.
Okay,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So, it's the hinge moments, morning and evening, when you're not at work and you're, unless you've got little kids that you've got to kind of see to or whatever, then the morning and the evening part of it, the reason they're often called the hinge moments of the day is because that's when sort of things hit a still point and you can usually spare a little bit of time to do something, to meditate or to do some prayer. Bedtime's the least appealing time to do that for most of us, because you just want to, watch telly and then hit the sack. Come on in. We set a chair aside. I've gone to prepare a place for you. Just pop that out of the way. But the middle of the day is a really difficult time, and that makes it one of the most fruitful times to set, 3 minutes aside, perhaps. But to take a moment in the middle of the day, not necessarily to do any meditation, a minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes or something, in the middle of the day, to just pause for a second and go, now hang on a minute, who am I? What am I doing? What am I about in this day? What's the intention I brought with me? To take a moment of silence, to let go of whatever's happened that morning and to not carry it with you into the afternoon, and remember who you are. So just as a moment of recollection. So to me, that's the kind of essence of the divine office. Morning, evening, bedtime, and noon. To sort of mark out those moments of the day. Conveniently enough, Raphael, Michael, Gabriel, and Uriel. angel of the dawn, the angel of the noon, the angel of the sun setting, and the angel of midnight. Dark Lord of the earth. Why Dark Lord of the earth? Because the sun moves, sets in the west, and passes under your feet through the middle of the night. Additional layer on the archangels. So there you go, divine office. The other, any questions, sorry? You good?
Is that still on?
It's still on.
Okay.
Its baleful red eye continues to wink at me. The all-seeing eye, the ABC. Decent poster.